Hey, we're in the shop today replacing the brake pads on our Yamaha Blaster, and if you think you need to do this on your machine and you're not sure if they're worn out or not, we're going to show you how to inspect those pads and replace them if you need to. Now the process is simple to do. It's going to be similar for the 2003 to 2006 Yamaha Blaster 200s, but the older ones, they are different. They've got those drum brakes in the front and a cable rear brake. Now if you need help with the front brake shoes, then you can watch our motorcycle brake shoe replacement video. That should give you enough information to guide you through that process. But again, we're just focusing on disc brakes today, so let's go ahead and get started. To do this job, we have some common hand tools and some cleaning supplies. Now the things you can't do the job without are 12mm combo wrenches. We've got 14 and 12mm sockets, 5 and 6mm Allens. And then other than that, we recommend using some safety glasses, rubber gloves, and some rags. For parts, we have several options for brake pads on our website. We went with the Tusk brake pads, both front and rear. We're also using some grease for the caliper pins and some brake cleaner. To inspect the brakes, you don't need to remove anything from the machine. You can simply turn the wheels to the side in the front. You'll look next to the caliper on that inboard pad and check for wear. Now it's kind of hard to see with our machine like this, so to better show the process, we are going to remove a wheel. So we've got our wheel off. We're looking at the outboard pad right here, and with that you can see there's a groove all the way down the pad. That's your wear indicator. So we still have some life in our front pads, so if you're down to that wear indicator or close to it, you definitely need to get these replaced. And if you don't see the wear indicator on yours, this is a brand new pad just for reference. Now looking straight on at the back of the machine, you can see these brake pads have less than 1mm of brake pad left on them, and it's almost metal to metal, and our rotor actually isn't looking very good either. So we're definitely going to get these replaced as well as our rotor, and even though the front pads don't need to be replaced yet, we're going to show you how to do that as well. We've gone ahead and removed our rear wheel. You don't have to do that, but the next thing we're going to do is loosen up these caliper pin bolts, and to do that you also need to bend out these tabs that are holding them in place. Now on the back side, we're going to remove the caliper mounting bolts. Now real quick, before we remove this caliper, there's two things we need to do. Number one, we need to loosen our adjusting bolt for the parking brake. Then we're going to use a 6mm Allen to loosen up the caliper slide pin. The next step is to remove the caliper. So you want to take out these two caliper mounting bolts. Now if you're in the same situation as us, we need to remove the rotor. So before we pull this off, we're going to hold the brake down and remove, or at least loosen up, the mounting bolts for that rotor. And then you're also going to want to remove the axle nut and hub. Now we can remove our mounting bolts and the caliper. Now again, you don't have to replace this rotor during a routine brake job, but if yours looks like ours and you've got a bunch of deep grooves in it, or if there's a ridge right by where the brake pad rides versus where it doesn't, you definitely want to replace it. So we'll go ahead and swap ours out. Make sure you use some medium strength thread lock on those bolts when you go back together. Now to tighten those bolts down, we placed a rag between our sprocket and chain. So now we can remove those caliper pins. And when I did that, my brake pad fell out. You can see how bad these are. That's crazy. There's almost no pad left. Some parts it's starting to flake off all the way. So the next step is to clean this out. There's going to be a little shim on the end of the piston we're going to remove. And we've got our brake cleaner. We'll just spray everything off. And if it's really bad in there, you can use, just a soft bristle brush and clean some of that up. So now that we have everything cleaned off a little bit, we're going to look at the top of the caliper and make sure the anti-rattle spring is still in place, which ours is. The next thing we need to do is make sure the caliper slides freely on these pins. So we're going to take the mounting bracket and try to move it back and forth. That's super sticky, so we need to clean these up and re-grease them. So what we're gonna do on this other side, we already loosened one of the pins. We're gonna remove that completely on this side and then just pull this mounting bracket all the way out. So just pay attention to that washer between your mounting bracket and that pin. We'll go ahead and pull this bracket out. Once you have those caliper pins out, you want to wipe them off, clean them up, and re-grease them. You also want to check the boots on the caliper, make sure they're in good condition, and just make sure you apply some blue Loctite on the threads of that upper caliper pin mount. And I'm just going to apply some fresh grease inside both of those boots as well. Then we can reinstall our slide pin and caliper mount. Now for these upper threads, I'm applying a little bit of Loctite right there. And the rest of the steps, we're gonna move quick and just get them done. That way the Loctite doesn't set up before we can tighten that down. The next step is to press this piston in. Now if you have it cleaned up, it should slide back in, but if you're having a hard time with it, you can open this bleeder up, run a hose down to your drain pan. That should help you be able to press it in, but then you're gonna have to top off your brake fluid. And if that still doesn't work, there's a chance you might have to rebuild this caliper if that's frozen up. But for us, we should be able to press this in with our fingers. Okay, so we're pressed in right there. So now we can put this little shim back in place on our piston. These caliper pins are pretty dirty. I'm just gonna clean them real quick with the Scotch-Brite. So the next step is to install your new brake pads. Now on the old ones, sometimes they'll have a spring or a shim on the back side. Ours didn't come with that on the back side, but if yours did, make sure you install it the same way it came off on the new pads. Then obviously we have the two holes facing towards the top of the caliper. Once those are set into place, you're going to slide your pins through all of those holes. And when you slide this in place, you might have to press up on the pads up against that spring that's on the top of the caliper. So we're all the way through. We're going to thread these in. Since we have a new rotor, we're going to clean it off with some brake cleaner and a rag. And that just makes sure it's perfectly clean and oil free. Now the next step is to make sure your brake pads are spread apart. You also want to check and make sure that you have that parking brake adjuster backed off all the way. And then we're going to slide the caliper into place. And once it's in place, you can install the mounting bolts, and we're going to torque them down. These are going to be 20 foot-pounds. Next, we can tighten down the pin pads. We're going to torque them to 13 foot-pounds, and then we need to bend up these locking tabs. It is a good idea to replace this plate. And from here, we need to pump up our brakes so the piston is pushed all the way out, and that's going to allow us to be able to adjust the parking brake. And then from here, what you want to do is make sure the jam nut is backed off far enough on your actual adjuster. The next step is to adjust your parking brake. So with this, the distance from the back of the cable mount to the center of that actuating arm should be 64 to 68 millimeters. So we need to go ahead and set that up. And to set that up, we're quite a ways off. So we're going to have to go up to the handlebar, loosen that lock nut on the cable, and we're going to give this some more slack. And then we're just going to turn our adjuster in until we're in spec. So now that we're in spec, we're going to go ahead and lock this down. So right there is about perfect for us. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten down that jam nut on our cable adjuster. So I feel resistance right there. You want to back it off about 1/8 of a turn from there. And then after that, you want to hold that in place and tighten down your jam nut. And then once you have it adjusted up, you just want to rotate your axle and make sure that the brakes aren't dragging. So ours are looking good. We're going to go ahead and move on to the front brakes. So for the front brakes, I'm going to remove the front wheel. Once you have your wheel off, you want to use your brake cleaner and a drain pan underneath your caliper, and we'll just spray everything off. First thing we need to do is loosen up the pad pin bolts with our 5mm Allen. After that, we'll remove the 2 caliper mounting bolts with our 12mm socket. Now as you pull this out, you're going to see there's a little indentation on this backing plate. So that's where the bottom of that mounting bracket is going to swing out from, but you're still going to have to push in on this bracket just a little bit. So from here, we're going to remove the brake pad pins along with those brakes. And then as you pull these out, make sure you check for any shims on the back. So since this has one on the inboard pad, we are going to reuse that. We'll just reinstall it on the new pad in the same way. So we already sprayed this piston off, but if it's still filthy around there, you can spray it off a little better now. And then you need to push it in. If it doesn't push in easy, again, you can crack that bleeder and then top off your fluid later on, or it may indicate that this is frozen up and you're going to have to rebuild the caliper. Now, I'm just using my fingers to press this in, but if you want, you can use a C-clamp to do that. So we're all the way in. Last thing we want to do is make sure that the mounting bracket slides on the pins easily. So our caliper is sliding smooth, but if it's not, you can do the same thing we did in the back, re-grease those pins. So from here, we need to reinstall our new brake pads. Now with the pad pins, you want to make sure there's no grooves in them, and if they're dirty, make sure you wipe them down. So I'll set the brake pad in place, push down on that anti-rattle spring, start both of these pins, and we'll install that outboard pad. So I'm looking down in here, I've made sure the pins are through both holes in each pad. So I'm going to go ahead and start threading these pad pins. So the next step, you want to make sure that the brake pads are as far apart as they can be, and then we're going to reinstall the caliper. And the easiest way to do this, the top section of the mount, you're going to slide that into place first, and then again you're going to have to swing the bottom side in, and you might have to press in on the backing plate just a little bit. So now that we're in place, we're going to reinstall the mounting bolts, and we're going to torque these to 20 foot-pounds. And the pad pin bolts, those are going to be 13 foot-pounds. And then from here, we're going to do the same steps on the other side. Once you have both sets of brake pads installed, you want to make sure you pump up the brakes before you use the machine. That's how you replace the brake pads on your 03 to 06 Yamaha Blaster 200. If you need any parts for your Blaster, you can pick those up on our website. And if you have questions about the install process, leave those down in the comments below. And if you want to see more helpful content like this, subscribe to our channel. I'm Charles with Rocky Mountain ATV MC. Thanks for watching.